The man drew a straight line across each of his companions' shoes. He did it so that when they crossed the extremely narrow plank bridge ahead, they could step straight forward without veering off course. But when they actually walked onto it, they discovered the real challenge wasn't moving forward. It was the deathly terror of being 10,000 meters up. Kais couldn't help but glance down. He was immediately terrified and lost his balance. Oh, thankfully he managed to steady himself at the end. Kais regretted it. He would rather go back to being a slave than take the 10 million bridge crossing prize and risk becoming a young smear of me. Unfortunately, Kais didn't get the chance to turn back. Worse still, several muffled thunderclaps rolled in from the sky. It was clearly about to rain. Fear spread fast. The timid man leading them suddenly imagined a gust of wind. He swayed violently. He had no choice but to risk everything and dash forward. Indeed, it turned out the bridge was wired to 10,000-volt shock pads, so crawling across the bridge wasn't going to work. But Kais and the others didn't know that. Electrifying the bridge wasn't just to raise the game's difficulty. It was mainly to entertain the tycoons watching from the other side. To those tycoons, the contestants' only value was to struggle and to die, thus highlighting the tycoons' elevated status. Thunder crashed again. Everyone began to panic. Some tried to tough it out and crawl through the current, but they were stunned by the shocks and fell. Some tried to turn back, shoving the people behind them aside, and both tumbled to their deaths, bringing roars of excitement from the tycoons. Eventually, the downpour came. When Kais came to his senses, he found that, driven by fear, only 2 of them were still alive. At that moment, Kais suddenly understood something. Hadn't his whole life been ruled by fear? So he'd been content to be discarded by society and live like a nobody. But fate is fair in its own way. A nobody like him would need to pay a higher price to turn things around. The only chance was right in front of him. If he didn't now give it everything and fight bravely, life would truly be hopeless. His remaining companion seemed to share that resolve. Together with Kais, they pressed on, determined. The difficulties in our lives right now are still part of life. So hurry up, go. Kais followed closely behind. He finally jumped onto the windowsill as well. If they could just step through that door, they could meet a new future. But as the door opened, Kais suddenly sensed something was wrong. The men up there looked at them as if they were waiting for a good show. Oh boy, when the contestants were giddy with relief, they were struck with a lethal blow. It turned out this was the real cruel spectacle. Kais, who had lost everything, tumbled into the room. He became the first winner of this extreme challenge. But when it came time to cash out, the organizer, Zhenchuan, started slicing and skimming. He docked the 10 million prize down to only 700,000. Only then did Kais realize, as an ordinary person, he couldn't possibly beat those who made the rules. He was furious, wanted to punch Zhenchuan's head in. He thought it would be futile, but unexpectedly that surge of anger caught the founder's attention. The old man saw something in him. The old man gave Kais a chance to turn his fortunes. He ordered Zhenchuan and Kais to gamble. He wanted Kais to lose and accept it with no complaints. The chosen game was interesting. Each player had 5 cards, split into 2 camps. One side had 4 commoners and 1 emperor. The other side had 4 commoners and 1 slave. The emperor beats a commoner. The commoner beats a slave. But because the barefoot slave fears no one wearing shoes, the slave beats the emperor. A rock, paper, scissors loop. Each round, both players played 1 card. If the slave successfully beat the emperor, the slave won. Otherwise, the emperor won. Obviously, the slave's chance of victory was low, only 1 in 5, but the payout was 10 times higher. Yet Kais resolutely chose the hard-to-win slave side, because he wanted, from the bottom, to strike back at the high and mighty Zhenchuan, avenge his friends, and reclaim dignity. The game began. Kais played cautiously, while Zhenchuan played with casual confidence. First round, commoner versus commoner. Second round, Kais held his breath nervously. Zhenchuan still acted calm as a breeze. Again, both commoners. Another tie. Third round, Kais's mental pressure neared its limit. He forced himself to control his emotions and laid down the decisive slave card. But Zhenchuan seemed to read his mind and casually threw out a commoner card, and just like that, knocked Kais out. But no one expected. Despite winning, the old man mercilessly beat Zhenchuan to a pulp. What a brutal fight. In the end, they made them win first, and finally forced them to wager fingers and hearts. This is the kind of fight they call fighting for life. Kais couldn't think of any cheating method. After all, there were no cameras in the room and no one stood behind him, so he nervously played the slave card. To his surprise, Zhenchuan once again casually played a commoner. Kais knew something was fishy, but he couldn't figure it out. Not until he was being escorted away. He desperately felt the slave brand on his arm, and then everything clicked. Under the brand, the slaves had been implanted with heart monitors, monitored 24/7, and what Jinchuan had been staring at was Kaiser's heart rate readout. Whenever his heartbeat sped up, it signaled Kais was about to play the slave card. Kais refused to give up. He confidently returned to the room, demanding another round, and pulled out a 50 million check. The check shut down Genchuan's attempt to refuse. It turned out that earlier, Kais had devised a sure-win plan. He used it to convince a female manager who Genchuan always sided with, and successfully borrowed 50 million. This time Kais didn't rush to the table. Instead, he deliberately banged his head until it bled. It was the first step of the strategy. Make his heart rate unstable so Genchuan's cheating watch would fail. Kais approached the table, removed 3 commoner cards, leaving only 1 slave and 1 commoner on the table. Notice this detail. While the old man babbled, Kais, with deft hands, swapped the slave card on the table with a commoner card. Then he leapt up in excitement. Blood splattered across the table, staining the cards. The final round began. Kais played the first card, and Jinchuan could no longer cheat. He was so nervous, he could barely hold himself together. After all, if he lost, he'd have to go be a slave for 100 years. He hesitated for a long time and chose to play it safe. First round, tie. Second round, Kais played more and more confidently, and Jinchuan began to sweat profusely. He noticed bloodstains on the card corners. Suddenly, he recalled, before the game, the 2 cards Kais had left on the table happened to be 1 commoner and 1 slave. Later, when Kais had lost his mind, both of those cards' backs got blood on them. So the card before them had a 50% chance of being the slave. Without hesitation, he played a commoner. "Come on," he taunted. But the result was a tie. The next bloodstained card would surely be the slave. Third round, still a tie. Into the fourth round. This was match point. Kais hesitated for a long while, then carefully played his card. Jinchuan was so excited, he was about to shout. Slave. Jinchuan, convinced of victory, decided to use a commoner to kill the slave. But the moment he played, he hesitated. The bloodstain on the card was so obvious. Wouldn't the kid notice that himself? Jinchuan suddenly remembered. Before the cards were bloody, Kais had made some strange little moves. He must have swapped the slave card with a commoner, meaning the 2 bloodstained cards were actually both commoners. What made Jinchuan even more sure was that he had once seen Kais swap a bloody card and win a similar gamble. Jinchuan concluded Kais was using the same trick again, so he decisively played the Emperor card. But Kais showed no reaction. After a long moment, Kais finally managed to play a card. The slave successfully beat the Emperor. Kais won. It turned out Kais had predicted Genchuan's prediction. He knew the sly, crafty Jinchuan would seize on every tiny detail. So the apparent swap was actually a fake move designed to bait Jinchuan into overthinking, let him fall to his own endless suspicion. "You little punk, then don't say another word. Why are you picking on someone better than you? You'd be angry, wouldn't you? You'd be furious, right? Jealous. So many people. You never let me speak. You never let me speak. I sold off those VIP's assets. You crazy slave." The once lofty Jinchuan had now completely become a slave, and Kais happily walked away with 500 million in prize money. But fate was unkind. Just as Kais, as agreed, was preparing to split the money 50-50 with the female manager, he was unguardedly drugged. When he woke up again, the 500 million was gone. Later he learned that the interest on the 50 million he had borrowed was charged by the minute, and it was absurdly high. Kais deeply regretted it. He shouldn't have tried to look mysterious at the card table. Wasting time is wasting money. But it wasn't all bad. At least Kais regained his freedom. If he set out again with resolve in the gamble that is life, I believe he won't lose again.